This was not your dream house. This was your before it is too late house. The house you bought because rent kept climbing. Your lease was ending. Your savings were collapsing. And the math was starting to look less like budgeting and more like a countdown. You were not shopping for granite countertops. You were shopping for survival. A roof, a mailing address, a place no landlord could suddenly reprice out from under you. That is why people do not understand this kind of purchase unless they have lived it. Sometimes a house is not a lifestyle upgrade. Sometimes it is the last decent option before storage units, borrowed couches, motel rooms, or moving back into a situation you already fought your way out of. So, when people say, "Congratulations on the house," what your nervous system hears is, "Maybe I am safe now." And that is exactly why the first hidden bill hits so much harder. Because this was never just a house, it was your exit route. Most home buying content assumes the buyer is comparing options: school district versus commute, kitchen layout versus backyard size, interest rate versus renovation budget. But last chance buyers are often comparing much uglier things: mortgage versus rent spike, closing costs versus not having enough for another deposit, tiny fixer-upper versus housing instability. That changes everything psychologically. You do not walk into the process feeling rich. You walk into it feeling cornered. And when a person buys under pressure, the house becomes emotionally overloaded from day one. It is not just shelter. It becomes proof that you still have control. Proof that the system did not completely beat you. Proof that you found one door that was still open. So if anything goes wrong after closing, the damage is not only financial. It threatens the meaning of the purchase itself. What outsiders see is keys and a closing table. What they do not see is the months before that. The rent renewal notice you could not absorb. The late-night searches, the applications, the rejections, the bad listings, the small down payment math. The fear that one more setback would push your life into something much harder to recover from. That is why this kind of buyer often accepts conditions other people would walk away from. Not because they are careless, because pressure compresses standards. Maybe the house is smaller than you wanted. Maybe the neighborhood is only acceptable, not ideal. Maybe the inspection raised enough concerns to make you nervous, but not enough to kill the deal. Maybe you told yourself, "I can fix this later. I just need to get inside." That sentence destroys a lot of people. Not because it is irrational, because it sounds perfectly rational when the alternative feels worse. The feeling is, I used my last real move on the wrong square. That is what makes this angle different from normal homeowner regret. If a high-income buyer finds a hidden repair, it hurts. If a buyer who was trying to outrun housing instability finds one, the repair can feel like the entire rescue plan was fake. Maybe the escrow jumps. Maybe the insurance quote comes back worse than expected. Maybe the plumbing fails. Maybe the roof issue that looked manageable suddenly becomes urgent. Maybe the appliances die one by one like they were waiting for the papers to finish signing. Any one of those things is annoying in a normal purchase. In a last chance purchase, each one sounds like the same message. You are never as safe as you thought, because they already know they bought under pressure. So the second something goes wrong, the brain starts building a prosecution case. You rushed this. You ignored red flags. You wanted out too badly. You should have waited. You should have saved more. You should have rented longer. You should have asked more questions. That inner voice is brutal because it edits history. It acts like you had calm options, but a lot of people did not. They had shrinking options, embarrassing options, expensive options, unsafe options, unstable options. And the house looked like the one move that could stop the bleeding. That does not mean every decision was perfect, but it does mean self-blame tends to ignore the actual conditions the decision was made under. This is the part that catches people. They think the victory is getting into the house, but the real battle is carrying the house after the closing adrenaline fades. Mortgage, escrow, insurance, utilities, repairs, maintenance, things the seller lived with. Things the inspector did not fully catch. Things nobody technically hid, but nobody really highlighted either. A buyer in a strong position sees these as budget categories. A buyer who was trying not to fall off the edge sees them as threats to stability. Because once the emergency fund is thin, every ordinary homeowner expense becomes dramatic. A $700 repair is no longer annoying. It is destabilizing. A $2,000 surprise is not just expensive. It is a direct attack on the only plan that was keeping you housed. That is why some buyers look numb right after closing. They are not ungrateful. They are mentally calculating how many things are allowed to go wrong before the whole safety story collapses. Even if the house is objectively better than the alternatives, the stress does not vanish immediately, because instability leaves residue. You still watch your account too closely. You still fear the mailbox. You still flinch at weird sounds. You still wonder whether one bad month can reopen the exact life chapter you thought you had just escaped. That is why "be grateful you own a home now" lands so badly on some people. Ownership does not instantly erase scarcity conditioning. The house may have solved the address problem. It may not have solved the nervous system problem. And if the house starts demanding money before you have rebuilt your footing, it can feel less like salvation and more like a fragile truce. This house was supposed to save you from homelessness. That does not always mean literal street homelessness tomorrow. Sometimes it means saving you from the whole downward slide. The forced move, the impossible rent jump, the borrowed room, the return to family chaos, the motel phase, the couch phase, the part of life where your housing starts depending on other people's patience. That is why the house meant so much. It was not just a purchase. It was a line in the sand. And when a house carries that much emotional weight, every defect feels symbolic. Not just, this repair costs money, but wait, was my rescue plan always weaker than I thought? That is what makes this kind of home buying story hit so hard. Not because the house is perfect, not because the buyer is naive, but because sometimes a person does not buy a house to level up. Sometimes they buy it because they are trying, with everything they have left, not to fall through. And once a house carries that role, every hidden problem feels like more than a bill. It feels like the floor trying to disappear again.